Hey guys, so Mad Cow season. Talking about why the Burning Crusade was great. Now I started burning in Burning Crusade. Um, I know I started before Black Temple. I know I started before Zulamon because I remember seeing the trailers for them when they came out. Um, I don't remember when I started. I just remember it definitely was before Zulamon. Um, I remember going to Zulamon when it first came out. I can't remember. I can't remember what guild I was a part of, but my friend was like, "Oh, you should come along." I'm like, "Why?" I'm not. It's like, well, just stand back and let other people do everything, and you're still new, so I'm like, okay, whatever. It didn't work out. Not because I was kept dying. It's just because the guild just wasn't killing anything fast enough. Um, ding. But yeah. I mean, it was great. Burning Crusade was great. Flying in Outland, so being able to fly around the world at your own pace, well, at your own pace, but not having a set destination where you could just fly all over. Illidan as the main villain, who was beloved by the fans. Um, Getting to fight Kael'thas, Lady Vaj, who are huge lore characters. Getting to fight Kill Jaden, one of the Eridar lords of the Burning Legion, the man who created the Lich King. So I mean, it was such a great expansion. Being able to go to Outland, which was, Draenor, before it started to, decided that it didn't want to be a planet anymore. But it was a great expansion, the first expansion. But enough talking. We already 2 minutes, and we'll probably talk more during this. So let me just let him, in his enthusiastic voice, tell us about why the Burning Crusade was so great.
The year is 2005, and the World of Warcraft has taken over the gaming world. Everyone's playing it. Your friends,
Seriously, this dude needs to chill.
co-workers, boss, celebrities. It's all over the news, being created as either a revolutionary cultural phenomenon or as poison destroying the minds and innocence of the youth. It was one of the first widely used forms of social media, and it introduced people to the idea of a shared online virtual world filled with people to meet and challenges to overcome, either alongside them or against them. The game at this point is inhabited by millions of players, each in their own microcosm of communities, and firmly entrenched in the throes of addiction. And on October 28th, 2005, they learned for the first time that the world is about to get bigger with the announcement of its first expansion.
How many of you have played World of Warcraft? In a very short time, we will be announcing details about the upcoming World of Warcraft expansion, the Burning Crusade.
Welcome to another episode of Why It Was, where we'll be covering exactly why the Burning Crusade was great. To really understand the gravity, you have to put yourself into the year. Today, the concept of a shared online world has lost nearly all of its wonderment and mystery. Just as how online games have evolved, so too has social media as a whole. Design elements that once made the genre unique are now borrowed in many different genres of games, and
The music he's using Wind Waker music right now, the Great Sea. Even that is nostalgic. That takes me back to what, 2003, 2004. I think it was 2003. But yeah, he likes to use Zelda music in his videos.
as a result, it's become just another category of gaming, and one that is most often quite predictable and formulaic at that. You choose a class, create a character, and burn through the leveling to reach the shiny end game, and you do that for a while until you get bored and wait for the next expansion. But back in these growing years of the genre, even the idea of an expansion was a new and exciting thing. World of Warcraft at this point was the standalone outlier most MMOs that came out lived quite short and uneventful lives. They often flopped, and they rarely turned a profit to warrant continue being supported, let alone having an entire expansion of content being developed for them. Today, you know what to expect. A new level cap, more zones and dungeons and raids, maybe a couple new systems here and there, but back then, not so much. Especially if you took into consideration the fact that social media as a whole was still in its growing stage. YouTube at this point was a dating website, the streaming culture hadn't existed yet, and so the spread of information was still in its early stages, so the announcement of a new expansion was accompanied by this shroud of mystery, and the most that you could hope to learn about it was from the official blog, fan websites, and also, of course...
Oh, that is so nostalgic. Oh, that is so crazy, man. Wow. Indeed, that is what it is. Wow. That's insane.
Word of mouth. But as time passed and the player base were enjoying what would eventually be the final stages of what is known today as vanilla World of Warcraft, some of the more major features of the expansion would begin to become clear. And importantly, the announcement was made at the very first BlizzCon in 2005. Today, Blizzard has become quite synonymous with controversy, and most discussion surrounding them is often laced with disappointment and pessimism, and it's for an understandable reason. The developer in recent years has been marked with controversy after controversy, whether it be lawsuits or just simply poor quality releases. But if you were to go back in time to 2005 and tell Blizzard fans of all of this, they simply wouldn't believe you, because the developer at this point was one of the most beloved in the industry. Their quality control was extremely strict, even canceling games if they felt like they weren't good enough. And because of this, no matter what game they released, whether it be an RTS or an action RPG, side-scroller, beat-em-up, whatever, if it had the Blizzard name attached to it, it was almost a guarantee that it was going to be genre-defining. They simply didn't miss, and as a result of that, the confidence of their fanbase was extremely high. It almost transcended a video game developer, and this was evidenced really well by BlizzCon.
Yeah, like most video game companies back in the day, when you saw Blizzard or Blizzard Entertainment on a product, you knew you're getting quality product. Whether it be World of Warcraft or StarCraft or Diablo, anything that Blizzard worked on was usually a very good quality product. Today, not so much. You know, it's kind of more of the same thing over and over, especially with WoW. You know, people are wanting them to implement some things that might have been introduced in some other MMOs. I'm like, after 20 years, we're finally getting player housing. Not after 20 years. I think the next expansion, Midnight, is when we're getting player housing. So, I mean, it's coming out soon enough. But it took 20 years to get player housing when other MMOs have had that for ages. You know, they'll say things at BlizzCon like, oh yeah, you're going to get to go to this place. But then the expansion comes out and you never get to go to this place. Because they'll say crap like, oh, well, it just didn't fit in the story. Who cares? The game's meant to be fun. Once you complete the main story, if you add an island or whatever, just for the fun of it, who cares? No one's going to complain about it. Like, people don't want things that are always narratively driven. So if you wanted to send us to I don't know, Farallon in Warlords of Draenor, you could have done so. Instead, it's like, oh, well, we didn't think that it fit in the story very well, and the story we were trying to tell. Well, maybe after the story, you know, all of the Tanan jungle crap and all that, you could have sent us to Farallon. I really wanted to see Netherstorm before it became Netherstorm, when it was a lush green area. I wanted to see that, but they're like, nope. And Blizzard constantly does that now. They promise things, they tell you things, and then they don't deliver. So they once were trusted for quality And now it's just like, oh, you get what you get.
To their fans, it was more than just video game franchises. It was this celebration of the communities that grew around them. And because of this, Blizzard became one of the very first developers to host a convention dedicated to their games specifically. And it was only appropriate that one of their biggest announcements ever took place at their very first convention in 2005. People from across the world who met each other virtually now met face to face, and unbeknownst to them at the time, they paid witness to their defining title getting its sequel. The Dark Portal, which had long been dormant since...
Also, another great thing about BC, I said we got to kill Jaden. We also got to take on Archimonde, the other Eridar Lord of the Burning Legion. And not just like a future version of him, like current day. No, we got to travel to the past to play the shitty games that sucked ass. No, we got to beat him at the burning of Teldrassil, burning of the World Tree. I would say burning of Teldrassil. But when the Lion or the Thralls working with Jaina and the Night Elves and Malfurion and all these people working together to save the World Tree, and we got to experience that. It wasn't very fun, trying to get up to Archimonde because it was just repetitive, like, oh, defeat this wave, defeat that wave, defeat this wave. It was boring. But being able to get up to Archimonde, that was huge.
Since the events of Warcraft 2 had finally awakened, which opened up a gateway into the realm known as the Outland. In the very first episode of the series, The Warlords of Draenor, we explored the old orc homeworld, where the various clans such as the Blackrock, Shadowmoon, and Hellscream resided. An expansion made possible by way of an alternate timeline, where it deviated at that pivotal moment where the leader of the Iron Horde, Gromash Hellscream, would accept Gul'dan's offering, turning he and his clan into mindless followers of the Burning Legion. So the Burning Crusade is the original timeline and set after the events of Warcraft.
I'm sorry, he used a version of Gromash from the movie. So I think it's a deleted scene, but they're all sitting around the Durotan, Orgrim, and all the orcs are sitting around this fire talking, and Gromash says something around something like, why be strong when you can be stronger still, and he's green, he's like roided, but then Ogrim's like, yes, but you're green. And it just kind of downplays the tension, it downplays the moment, because you've got Gromash all like roided up, kind of looking, his veins bulging, and he's like, but why be strong when you can be stronger still? And then Orgrim was just like a big smile. He's like, yes, but you're green. For an orc, they're all brown. That's the color of the orcs. But only when they get infused with the Fel do they turn green. Which is why Thrall is green, because he was exposed to it. But it's just like with this goofy grin, he's like, yes, but you're green. It's a great scene because it shows just how human the orcs really are. I loved it. I saw that, I'm like, that's great. That's great. And we got to see Gromash. The live action Gromash, which is amazing. He's probably one of the coolest fucking characters in World of Warcraft, or Warcraft in general.
2, where the once lush and beautiful lands were destroyed and corrupted as the Burning Legion spread its influence across the world. This was the original demon expansion, while adventurers were busy fighting old gods and minions of the Lich King in Azeroth. Sargeras' Burning Legion was preparing for an invasion from the Outland and through the Dark Portal. The world itself consisted of 7 zones, with enough quests to support 10 new levels of character progression, including new spells and more talent points to spend on brand new talents. In these 7 zones were a whopping 16 dungeons, and even more important was the new heroic difficulty setting. In the Legion episode, we discussed the Mythic Plus system and Blizzard's attempt to bring 5-man content up as a viable form of endgame. Heroics were the first attempt at this. As vanilla got older, naturally the players became better and more geared, and because of that, the dungeon slowly transitioned from the endgame to a stepping stone to the endgame for many of its player base. So Blizzard at this point in time saw that as a shortcoming, and they wanted dungeons to remain a real challenge, so they released this heroic difficulty mode, which was essentially a scaled up version of the dungeon where the enemies and bosses had more health and they dealt more damage. Since we mentioned raiding, another big change that wasn't advertised on the box but was still equally huge was the reduction in size. Raiding in MMOs when vanilla first released didn't really have any set standards on player size. With instanced raid themselves being a rarity, it usually just boiled down to how many people could gather in one area before the servers crashed. So the idea of a maximum number of players was relatively unexplored. Eventually that number became 40, and their difficulty was of course designed around that, with a couple that were also limited to 20. In the end, they felt that the best number was somewhere in between, and they would substantially reduce it to 25 for most of them, and then 10 for the smaller raids. There were many reasons for
Right there. Not that. Not that. Come on, where was it? Karazhan. The legendary Tower of Karazhan. I mean, they put so many amazing legendary things into the Burning Crusade, between characters, locations. Like, it was a freaking a player, like anyone who loved the lore of the game, it was like their fucking wet dream. It had so much. Karazhan, the home of Medivh, the Guardian. Which Karazhan alone is incredibly powerful and important, because with the ley lines and all that, it was so good. It was, and I remember spending many a night with the guild trying to get through there, but of course my guild sucked. We never really got far.
and then 10 for the smaller raids. There were many reasons for this, but 2 of the big ones were to lighten the load on both the guild leaders and the developers. Coordinating 40 people to all be online at the same time is a pain that only vanilla guild and raid leaders understand. It's the special maddening mix of finding replacements for absences.
Yeah, which is something I'm honestly glad they got rid of. So like nowadays there's flexible, where you might be with your guild and you're doing a raid, right? And there might be 25 people. If someone leaves, it's not like, oh, well, I need to go back and find someone. No. It scales. So if a person leaves, it scales. So you don't have to worry about keep going back, because back in the day, you'd have a person leave and then it's like, oh, I got to go back to the city and blah, blah, blah. And then you're like, oh, need healer, then good to go. But then people get impatient. They keep leaving. And then suddenly 25 people turns into 15 people. And now you're like, okay, I need 3 healer, 5 DPS, another tank and 3 healers, then good to go. And then that could take hours sometimes, which means more people are going to leave, because people are not going to sit there for 2-3 hours while waiting for a group to fill up. But nowadays it's flexible. So if you have 25 people and someone leaves, you don't have to go back to the city and sit there and spam it in chat saying, oh, you need this and good to go. It just, it scales to how many people are there. So one person leaves, it scales to whatever's left. So it stays challenging, but it's not impossible to do, because, it's just, so if someone joins, they'll just scale back, scales up. So I really like the change, but yeah, some people like that nostalgia of having to go back to the capital city and need 2 healers and a tank, then good to go.
Replacing members who quit, dealing out loot in a way that doesn't make people angry, dealing with guild drama, loot disputes, raiding consumables. It was certainly a second job by itself, and Blizzard threw them a bone by reducing the raid size to 25, but perhaps their primary reason was to lighten the load on their designers, as raids designed for 40 people introduced a number of challenges in their environment. The rooms had to be massive to hold 40 people and a boss, and the lay of the land generally had to be more horizontal than vertical. And this issue is shown quite perfectly with the vanilla version of the Karazhan raid. As you may know, this would eventually become one of the release raids for the Burning Crusade.
Yeah, if you go into the original Karazhan, it is extremely tight. I mean, like tight, like fresh, Friday night before you start your job, that kind of tight. It was so closed in, and if they had kept that version of Karazhan, it would have been extremely annoying to try to make it around with 40 people or whatever. So widening the rooms and making it more grandiose, because it is Karazhan, so it should be grandiose. I'm glad they did, because you would have had to try to 40 people in those small rooms navigating, and especially with bosses, very small area to move, especially if they had like an AoE. It would have been annoying.
Would eventually become one of the release raids for the Burning Crusade, but it was intended to be in the game as early as vanilla. But the issue, as described by former developer John Statz in his book, The Warcraft Diary, the developers had many issues in designing it, as they were just unable to create a vertical tower-like structure that could hold 40 people and a raid boss. Even given that, the map file itself in this failed version was extremely large and took hours to even load, and they were only able to get a final playable version in the expansion when they reduced its scale all the way down from 40 players to 10. But even outside of Karazhan, it would make the raids much easier to design, since they were almost halving the conventional big endgame raid size. Another one of the expansion selling points would be its two new races, the Blood Elves for the Horde and the Draenei for the Alliance. The latter are an Eridar race who fled from the Burning Legion's corruption. Aesthetically, they're tall, blue-skinned, and hoofed beings with glowing eyes, and also tails, and are devout followers of the light, led by their leader, Prophet Velen. After crash landing on Azeroth in their ship, the Exodar, they joined the Alliance to fight evil, and are known for their wisdom and resilience. As for the Blood Elves, they already had...
Yeah, I was going to give a little bit of background on the Draenei and Blood Elves, but he's doing it for me. But just with the Draenei, like, they were running from the Burning Legion, like, killed Jaden for like thousands of years. So they finally crashed onto to Azeroth, and that's one reason why the Burning Legion keeps coming to Azeroth, is because of the Draenei. Because Kill Jaden, it was hellbent on destroying them, even though he was a part of the Eridar at one point. Sargeras kind of manipulated, corrupted, kind of offered Velen, Archimonde, and Kill Jaden power. Archimonde and Kill Jaden obviously took it, but Velen, being the prophet and being able to see the future, he was like, "No, this shit's I'm not taking shit. I prefer you don't take offer, but I know what happens. I can't stop you, so I just run. We just run now." Prophet Velen. But yeah, the Eridar are really cool. And then at the end with Legion, when beating Argus, and Sargeras finally being imprisoned within the throne of the Pantheon, that breath, that sigh of relief that Velen takes after thousands of years being chased around the cosmos by the Burning Legion, he can finally relax and not have to worry about it. Just seeing that little sigh of relief, you're like, oh my god, oh, that hits hard. It hits hard. It's just a sigh, but it hits so hard.
Had established a presence in vanilla. Many people don't remember them because they shared the same models as the Night Elves, but they were just lighter in skin tone and hair color. They saw their official release in the expansion, however, along with a makeover where they actually got their own unique models and animations. Lore-wise, they were introduced as a once proud people that were decimated by the Scourge. They hailed from their homeland, Kothalas, and they had turned to fell magic to sate their arcane addiction after the Sunwell's destruction, which caused their eyes to glow green. Led by their leader, Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider, they seek redemption and power, and they aligned themselves with the Horde for survival. Perhaps most importantly,
So yeah, the Sunwell was destroyed because of Arthas. He sacked the place. He revived Kel'Thuzad using the Sunwell. And so these elves who kind of lived off of this magic source no longer had that magic source. So Kael'thas was approached by Illidan, and Illidan's like, I will help your people if you help me. And Kael'thas is like, all right, I have nothing to lose. I mean, my people are gonna die if we don't get a source of magic. So he joined the Burning Legion, or not the Burning Legion. Actually, he kind of eventually joined the Burning Legion because he was kind of trying to kill Jaden into the world at the Sunwell Plateau. But he joined Illidan, and yeah, we fight him in Tempest Keep, which was merely a setback. But yeah, the destruction of the Sunwell came at the hands of Arthas, who would become the Lich King.
with these two races was that they allowed for the first time access to a unique class for both factions, the Paladin for the Horde and the Shaman for the Alliance. One of Vanilla's defining traits was that these two classes were locked to both of these factions, which created some interesting uniqueness and separation between the Horde and the Alliance, but also difficulties in balance since they were so wildly different and they brought different strengths and weaknesses. So perhaps similar to the raid size reduction, this could have been another case of the developers making their lives easier in raid design by having a more equal playing field. But as we learned with BFA and Draenor, the main features are really only as strong as their supporting features. Professions and skill crafting are their own form of endgame for many players, and they would see a lot of love across the board with new recipes and specialization quests. But perhaps most notable would be the addition of a new one, jewel crafting, where by mining, players could loot gems and create various items and jewelry, or cut them into various stat boosts, which were then applied to the also new socketed items.
Yeah, that was a big deal back then. You know, even you can see socket like set and stuff like that. So being able to have a gem that gave you like +5 crit or whatever, that was huge. So if you have multiple pieces of gear, usually it was like the gauntlets, the boots, the pants, the chest piece, the headpiece, the shoulders. If you had multiple pieces and you had everything with gems in them, and the correct gems, because then you get a bonus for it, field power bonus, you were good to go. Like, it made you feel extremely powerful because you kind of did see an increase in your DPS, or whatever the case is, or crit being higher, or your hit being higher, or whatever the case was. You felt the difference. So being able to craft these powerful gems that you were able to socket into gear to give you a boost. I mean, when it came to end game stuff like raids, every little bit helped. Every little bit helped. Whether it be a little extra push to get your hit rate up to what you wanted it to be, or a better chance to crit, every little bit helped. And it was really, really cool being able to do that.
Many of the new items in BC would have different colored sockets to match with certain gems, playing off of the color wheel. which added another layer of customization on top of the enchant system that was already in place. But PvE wasn't the only area to see change, as it was the Burning Crusade is when arena modes made their debut. Up until this point, there were 3 main choices for PvP: to fight out in the open world, inside of instance battlegrounds with objectives to compete for, or in friendly duels outside of your major capital. Although all 3 of these had their fair share of competitiveness, with battlegrounds probably being the most intense, Blizzard wasn't quite satisfied, and they wanted to gain some ground on the then growing esports scene. They had already seen some success with their RTS series, Warcraft and StarCraft. StarCraft in particular was gaining some serious popularity, so it only made sense that they saw the potential with their MMO juggernaut, and so the arena system was born, where there was just one objective: kill the other team in a one-life team deathmatch setting. Players could create teams of 2, 3, or 5 and compete against each other in various arenas for ranking, which would unlock access to high-level PvP gear and other rewards such as mounts. These pieces also had a new stat called Resilience, which reduced damage taken from other players in an effort to make the PvP less bursty and more controlled, and this itself was a huge change in the flow of the PvP of the game. It was a clear challenge from the developer. You think you're good at PvP? Well, now it's time to prove it. They had hoped that this system would foster a more competitive environment and finally allow them to bring World of Warcraft into esports along with StarCraft and Warcraft. And most exciting for many were the addition of flying mounts. Azeroth was a big place. Between the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor, it held 38 zones to explore, and discounting flight paths and boats and zeppelins, it was all on the ground. And while this certainly has its advantages, such as giving the world the feeling of being massive and imposing, many dreamed of wresting control away from their pre-designated flight paths and to go where they pleased. As such, flying mounts became a highly requested feature throughout all of Vanilla's lifespan, and they finally saw it released in the Burning Crusade, where after reaching the new maximum level, 70, they could unlock the ability to train them, which allowed them to fly in the Outland, with Azeroth still being locked to the ground. And all of this was to start the expansion. These were but a few of the major features that the expansion had to offer, but previews alone looked quite promising. From this point, Blizzard would frequently post updates on their website and fed bits and pieces and details to the players little by little. And so, World of Warcraft Vanilla continued on. Eventually, the final raid, Nyxramis, was released, and the player base was left with a question: what's next? Well, on January 16th, 2007, they found out with the release of the hottest game's first expansion, the Burning Crusade.
Flash, fantasy, and fixation are the features that contribute to the addiction that millions cannot shake for an online game called World of Warcraft. Now there's mania on top of madness for the game, and you've got to brace yourself for this. There's a new version that's about to erupt on the scene.
When it comes out, man, I'm just gonna non-stop.
Easy there, big guy.
I'm sorry for my girlfriend, because, I'm just gonna keep playing.
Understandable, because games...
Speaking from experience here, this was one of the most exciting times in the game's history. Being at the maximum level for so long, the idea of seeing new zones and going on new quests and getting more items was incredibly exciting. This was also before the era of digital downloads, so anyone who wanted a copy would have to physically leave their basements and go get them from the store. Many would attend launch parties and wait in line in tents, counting down the hours and minutes until midnight when they could pick up their copies. Now a nostalgic, long-lost tradition that came with new video game releases. Developers made special appearances in California, and they would sign copies before sending the players off into the Outland. Guilds raced to the new maximum level and started their attunement chains, and everyone watched as their classes grew, learning new spells and unlocking the mysteries of the Outland. They would storm through the Hellfire Peninsula and through the Dark Portal, and trudged through the swamps of Zangarmarsh, and explored the rolling hills of Nagrand, all while fighting through hordes of the Burning Legion and their allies. Although I would say that it was the next expansion, Wrath is when they really started to hit their stride with the storytelling. The Burning Crusade is when it really started to get some structure. In vanilla, important lore moments.
But not completely, though. We were fighting Illidan, and we didn't know why. All we knew that was that he went to Outland and just started being a big doo-doo head to everyone. You know, he had the help of Lady Vashj, he had the help of Akama, he had the help of Kael'thas, but we didn't know why we were fighting him, because he wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't a bad person. You know, in Warcraft 3, he basically sacrificed himself, his humanity, became a demon so that he had enough power to fight the demons. And even as a demon, he was still looking out for the planet. You know, but his brother was like, "You are no brother of mine. Be gone from this place and never set foot in our lands again." And no fighting. No, he's like, "So be it, brother. Or as you wish, brother." And, you know, so he wasn't a bad guy. So when we get to Outland and we're like, we have to fight him, it's like, what? Okay, but why though? It just didn't make any sense why we would have to fight this character who's not actually bad. You know, Maiev shows up. But it's like I said, we go to Outland and we're told that, oh, Illidan Stormrage is being a big dookie head and he's doing mean things, so we need to kill him. And you're like, is there going to be loot involved? Yes. Okay.
Were sprinkled in here and there by way of quest dialogue, or perhaps in-game books that the players could read through. But for the most part, the world itself was the main character, and it was more about just being a very small part of it. While this isn't necessarily inferior, it was the Burning Crusades when they started to transition away from the world and more towards important lore characters. The story and the plot would be more integrated into the quests themselves, and there'd be more instances of NPCs where they would engage in dialogue with the players. Expansion villains were also introduced early on in quest chains, which would lead to dungeons themselves and then finally raids. And they really started leaning heavily on characters established within the lore, such as the first demon hunter, Illidan Stormrage, and his ally, Kael'thas Sunstrider. The raids were also a very large part of this, whether it be the Sanctum of the Fallen Guardian, Medivh, or the time traveling in the battle for Mount Hyjal, or fighting through the halls of the fallen Eridar capital. It was clear that the lore and story had started to really become a large focus of the game. They were as difficult as ever. Heroics were split up in theme into different hubs spread throughout the world, and they provided pretty stiff challenges, especially early on, and they rewarded valuable loot in return. Many today reminisce that the raids were the hardest in the game's history. The actual raid size was reduced, but this meant there was less room for dead weight. Each of the 25 players had to be very capable and on top of their game to clear through them before they would eventually be hit with the nerf bat. This was just due to their sheer difficulty, but another huge part of it was just the fact that there was still only one difficulty mode. Today, especially since the Cataclysm with the release of the Looking for Raid mode, some would even say it's a trivial matter to see all of what the game has to offer at its most base level. But back then, if you couldn't kill a boss, there was no lower difficulty mode to run to. You either just had to play better and kill it, or hope that it would be tuned down. And while this is certainly unforgiving, it also ensured that there was always something to work towards. There would always be some optimization you could do. It could be a gear piece to acquire, maybe some enchants or gems to tweak, and it demanded that players to look at any and all crevice for ways to improve their characters and their gameplay. Even zoning into them was a challenge, as it also marks the era of attunements, long quest chains that required a campaign across the Outland and its dungeons, and even previous raid tiers. They would be complicated enough that diagrams like this would be needed to even understand it all, and it served as its own form of character progression beyond the traditional leveling and gearing that players were familiar with. So, all of this is to say, especially with the player's skill level at the time and the limit of information across social media, There was certainly no shortage of difficulty in the Burning Crusade, and as for its overall balance, the Horde finally got to enjoy the benefits of Paladin blessings, and likewise the Alliance saw benefits from Shaman totems, which brought this new element of balance and meta to the game. And speaking of this, and this wasn't something that you would find on the list of major features, but another thing that really defined the expansion was the way that the classes evolved. As revolutionary as vanilla was at the time, the class balance was still in its early stages, and there would be some specializations that you would rarely see in any area of the game, not just raiding. Certain classes like paladins were primarily forced to heal, as their damage and tanking trees weren't very effective. Some specializations would run out of mana within the first 30 seconds of a fight, so the Burning Crusade sought to change this with huge reforms to class balance and bringing specializations like the Retribution Paladin up to be more viable, or perhaps giving Shadow Priests a way to
Yeah, if you were a Ret Pally, you were laughed at. Nowadays, they're looked at like they're pretty strong. Back in the day, if you were a Ret Pally, you were laughed at.
regenerate mana, or giving druids an actual resurrection. And it's because of this is why a lot of people today see Burning Crusade as this sort of sweet spot of having a lot of the charm of vanilla World of Warcraft, but without a lot of the jank, especially in terms of its class balance, or lack thereof. And as for Arena, it's a high activity from across the board as the game's best players began to separate themselves apart from everyone.
Okay, I just have to appreciate the first name up there, Chobits. Great anime, great manga. If you haven't read it or watched it, I recommend it. It is really, really good.
It was during this time that the esports scene for the game had started to grow, and Blizzard started hosting tournaments and pitting the best against the best. Personalities tied to the game had started to gain followings, and it really marked a new era in the PvP side of the game. And beyond all of that, flying, jewel crafting, the new races, it was all received quite favorably, and the players just seemed to be lost in the enjoyment of all of the shiny new things. As always though, it wasn't all perfect, and I always like to include both sides of the story with these videos. There definitely were complaints to be found. As popular as flying mounts were, they did also have a negative effect in the previously mentioned feeling of being in this massive world. It's the massively multiplayer online role-playing game. It's literally in the name. The feeling of this massiveness and...
I disagree. Back then, you still flew extremely slow. Nowadays, when you can go like 400% faster and just woof, right through the zone, that makes the world feel smaller. But back in the day, when you're only flying at like 75% speed and you're still just... It didn't take away from the scope of the world, because it still took forever just to get across the zone. It was really no faster than having a flight path, except instead of going here and there and there and there, you could just fly straight to it. But it still took forever. So it still gave the world that vast feeling, as opposed to now you just whoosh, and then you zip off, and you know, like Durotar, you can fly across the whole of Durotar in like 10 seconds. It wasn't like that back then. It still took a while to cross. So I disagree with the flying. It was so slow back then that the world still felt big. Even though you're flying above it, it still felt big because it still took so much longer to to get across, as compared to say now, where you're flying at like 400 or 500 times speed, 500% faster, and you're just woof, right to the end of the zone. No matter how big the zone is, it just takes you a few seconds to get across it.
Enormity is a core pillar of the genre, and as inconvenient as it was to trudge around on the ground, having your wings clipped and being forced to navigate it in this way really did a lot to give the players the feeling of this enormity and danger within the world. Combining the flying and the expansion's relatively small landmass in comparison to Azeroth, the world did have quite a small feeling to it, especially once players started unlocking the fastest speed. You could really go from one corner of the world to another in minutes, which was something that wasn't possible in vanilla, barring the pre-designated travel options like boats or zeppelins. Another negative for some would be that with the paladin and shaman now being shared, although the game was much more balanced and the fights were more easily designed, many argued that it also lost a lot of its unique charm. These two classes being restricted was just another thing that set the factions apart from one another. Some argue that one of Vanilla's greatest strengths is its greatest weakness. With imbalance comes uniqueness and a lack of curation and restrictions. And for many, that's really one of the major appeals of the genre. You're sort of thrown into this world, and the experience is what you make of it, almost like an unrestricted playground. And while the Burning Crusade was far from it, this fixation on balance, many remark today, is the source of removing a lot of its charm and uniqueness and freedom. Eventually, Blizzard would start seeing weaknesses in classes as straight up flaws and sought to remove them completely for the sake of balance, but in the process of doing so, they began to lose their identity and started to bleed into one another, so much to the point that they had to completely redo all of them in the Legion expansion to give them an actual identity once again. Another complaint, again not tied to the expansion itself, was that it also marked the birth of daily hubs. In the Outland, there were various factions where, in order to further your reputation with them, you'd need to return daily and complete a set of tasks. This was done to add incentive to keep logging in every day, and as you would know if you saw the Battle for Azeroth episode, this
Getting the Nether Drake was annoying, but it was also fun at the same time. You had to go back every day and make sure you did it, because if you fell behind... But I remember doing it, and it was well worth it, because the Nether Drakes look pretty cool, at least for back then.
would eventually become a monster that they lost control of, and it slowly transitioned from an incentive to log in to a punishment for not logging in as they began to dominate every corner of activity. In BC itself, it was rather contained, but it did mark the beginning of a real problem. But in reality, in the criticism section, when I'm mentioning things that weren't even problems during the time, you know it was pretty good. The Burning Crusade had a lot of improvements, certainly a lot to unpack, and it was delivered quite well with a strong cadence of patches to follow. There were some fairly sizable dead spots, but largely because everything was so difficult. Many were actually quite thankful for having a chance to catch up and actually finish a raid before the next one was released. It marks one of the most exciting periods in the game's history. This already massive worldwide phenomenon somehow became even bigger, and the rising subscription numbers show that quite clearly. The expansion today is looked back upon very favorably. For many, it's their favorite era of the game, and it marks a time where the confidence in Blizzard and their games was at this all-time high, and the community was extremely excited and optimistic, and it's certainly earned its reputation as one of the greats of not only the MMORPG genre, but the gaming industry at large. Thanks for watching my video. So this is the fourth in the series and the second of the greats. So far we've been sticking within the realm of World of Warcraft, but I would like to open this series up to other MMOs and games, and I think in the next one we might take a step outside of World of Warcraft for a moment, but I do definitely want to cover the rest of the expansions, so regardless of where we go, I hope you enjoy it. I really enjoy making them. Let me know if you have any feedback, and remember...
Oh, Capitano. I mean, the Lich King. Capitano, the captain from Genshin Impact, basically pulled a Arthas. At the end of the Natlan Archon quest, he same pose and same everything. You get it. I remember there must always be a Lich King. But yeah, the game when it came out was the first expansion, crazy amount of number of players. And then you get to Wrath of the Lich King, which hit an all-time high of about of 11 million subscribers. That's insane. It's insane. But Burning Crusade offered so much, so many lore characters thrown in, so many lore heavy locations, professions that were added, Outland, which was amazing, getting to see the home of the Draenei, even though it wasn't exactly stable anymore. Pieces floating in the sky, and you see the twisting nether, and but it was still cool. You got to meet Garrosh, who was just this orc on Draenor who wanted to know more about his father and his people, and it was just a really, really great time. Like I said, the fact that we were fighting Illidan and we didn't know why, I really wish they would have explored it more in the game. Like telling us, oh, well, this is why you're doing it. Instead, it's like, oh, Illidan's being a meanie weenie head. We need to kill him. It's like, okay. Well, I mean, the Warglaives dropped, so sorry, Illidan, you're not a bad guy, but I want those Warglaives. But yeah, such a great expansion. Great expansion. Is it better than Wrath of the Lich King? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But it set up Burning Crusade crawled so that Wrath of the Lich King could walk. But yeah, let me know when you guys started. If you played, let me know when you started. What you remember fondly about BC and what you wish they changed about BC. Anyway, that's going to do it for me. You guys know the drill. I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.